wealth, power, betrayal. When Eleanor Grayson, one of the richest women in New York, is dragged into court by her own grandson, the world watches in shock. Accused of embezzling millions from her family's trust, she faces a battle not just for her reputation, but for the truth. Lucas Grayson, once the heir to a vast fortune, claims his grandmother stole what was rightfully his. The evidence is damning. The prosecution is relentless. And as the courtroom drama unfolds, secrets buried for decades begin to surface. But in this fight for justice, not everything is as it seems. Who is telling the truth? Who is hiding behind lies? And when the final verdict is reached, will it bring redemption or ruin? Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, where in the world are you watching from? The massive wooden doors of the Manhattan Supreme Court creaked open, allowing a rush of murmuring voices and flashing cameras to spill into the grand courtroom. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Grayson, a woman of 75, dressed in an elegant navy blue coat, her silver hair pinned neatly in place. Despite the gravity of the moment, she moved with the poise of someone who had weathered storms far worse than the one brewing inside these walls. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, legal analysts, and onlookers filled every seat, eager to witness what was being called the trial of the century. At the prosecution table sat Lucas Grayson, her only grandson, a man in his late 20s with sharp features and an expression carved from ice. Once he had been the child she held in her arms, the boy she read bedtime stories to. Now he was her accuser. The judge, a middle-aged man with piercing eyes, banged his gavel. This court is now in session. Lucas's attorney, Daniel Harper, rose from his seat. Your Honor, the prosecution presents clear and undeniable evidence that Eleanor Grayson, a woman entrusted with the Grayson Family Trust, has systematically funneled millions into an undisclosed account for personal gain. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor remained still, her expression unreadable. Harper continued, his voice confident. The Grayson Family Trust was meant to support philanthropic causes. Yet over the past 5 years, more than $50 million have been diverted to an offshore account in Eleanor Grayson's name. This is not generosity. This is fraud. At the defense table, Eleanor's attorney, Emma Caldwell, exhaled slowly before standing. Your Honor, the defense acknowledges the prosecution's claims, but requests additional time to examine the documents in question. Rushing to judgment in this courtroom without proper review would be a grave mistake. The judge nodded. Understood. However, we will proceed with witness testimonies first. The court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. The prosecution will present its first witness then. As Eleanor rose from her seat, the whispers in the courtroom grew louder. Reporters and photographers surged toward the entrance, eager to capture her reaction. Outside the courthouse, the steps were swarmed with journalists, their microphones and cameras aimed like weapons. Eleanor Grayson, do you deny stealing from the trust? One reporter shouted. Mrs. Grayson, your grandson says you betrayed the family. Do you have anything to say to him? Another asked. Eleanor finally stopped. She turned to the cameras, her gaze unwavering. The truth will come out in court. That is all I will say. Lucas scoffed from the sidelines, his voice cutting through the noise. Not if the truth is buried deep enough. Emma pulled Eleanor away from the crowd, guiding her toward the waiting car. We need to talk, she whispered urgently. Inside the vehicle, Emma's calm facade cracked. Eleanor, I've spent years in courtrooms, and this is one of the strongest cases I've seen against a defendant. The documents, the bank records, everything points to fraud. If there's something I don't know, now is the time to tell me. Eleanor gazed out the window as the city blurred past. Emma, she said softly, do you believe I stole from my own family? Emma hesitated. I believe in evidence. And right now, the court believes you're guilty, unless we prove otherwise. Eleanor smiled slightly. Then let's prove otherwise. As the car disappeared into the night, Lucas remained on the courthouse steps, watching. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. A deep voice answered. Did she take the bait? Lucas clenched his jaw. She walked into that courtroom like she owned it. But it won't last. When I'm done, she'll lose everything. A slow chuckle echoed through the receiver. Good. Then we're one step closer to getting what we want. Lucas hung up, his grip tightening around the phone. Inside the courthouse, the janitor swept the empty courtroom, unaware that the next morning, as the trial continued, shocking revelations would turn the case upside down. The game had only just begun. The next morning, the Manhattan Supreme Court buzzed with energy as the trial resumed. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens scratching against notepads, cameras clicking in bursts. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on Eleanor Grayson, the woman accused of embezzling millions. Lucas sat at the prosecution table, his face a mask of quiet confidence. Across from him, Eleanor remained composed, hands folded neatly on the defense table. Beside her, Emma Caldwell was already scanning the prosecution's documents, her mind racing. Something wasn't adding up. The judge entered, and the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. This court is now in session. Prosecution, you may call your first witness, the judge instructed. Daniel Harper, Lucas's attorney, stood. Your Honor, the prosecution calls James Holloway, forensic accountant. A middle-aged man in a gray suit took the stand. After being sworn in, Harper wasted no time. Mr. Holloway, can you confirm that funds from the Grayson Family Trust were funneled into a private account under Eleanor Grayson's name? Yes, Holloway responded, adjusting his glasses. Over the past 5 years, approximately $50 million were transferred to an offshore account registered under Eleanor Grayson. Emma stood. Objection, Your Honor. The existence of the account does not prove fraudulent intent. We request further clarification. The judge nodded. Sustained. Mr. Holloway, can you confirm how this money was used? Holloway hesitated. The funds were moved, but our records do not show any withdrawals for personal use. The account remains active, with regular deposits, but no evidence of luxury spending. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Emma's mind sharpened. If Eleanor had been stealing, why wasn't there a single lavish expense? Harper, unfazed, pressed on. Isn't it suspicious that someone would move millions into a hidden account with no clear explanation? Holloway nodded. In financial crimes, it is common for embezzlers to let funds sit before laundering them through shell companies. Harper turned to the jury. There you have it. A textbook case of fraud. No receipts. No proof of philanthropy. Just a secret account filled with money that should have been used for the family trust. Emma stood quickly. Cross-examination, Your Honor. The judge gestured for her to proceed. Emma approached the witness stand. Mr. Holloway, are you aware of the full extent of Mrs. Grayson's charitable work? Holloway hesitated. Not in detail. Emma nodded. Then tell me, if Mrs. Grayson were funneling money into an undisclosed charity, would your report reflect that? No, unless the organization was registered under the trust's name. Emma turned to the jury. Exactly. So while we see money being moved, we do not see how it was used. The court cannot convict someone based on incomplete information. Lucas shot Emma a glare, but she ignored him. The judge sighed. I agree that intent is still in question, but the presence of the account remains suspicious. We will continue with the next witness. The bailiff called for a recess. As soon as the judge exited, Emma leaned toward Eleanor. That money isn't sitting in some offshore vault for your personal gain, is it? Eleanor met her gaze. Of course not. Then where is it? Eleanor hesitated. I can't tell you. Not yet. Emma exhaled sharply. Eleanor, the court needs answers. If you keep secrets, they will assume the worst. Eleanor gave a small, knowing smile. Then let them assume for now. Meanwhile, in the back of the courtroom, A man in a dark coat slipped out the doors. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "It's done," he murmured. "The case is strong, but there's a gap. They're starting to question where the money went." On the other end of the call, a voice chuckled. "Let them question. Soon, the real game begins." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Lucas as he exited. "Do you believe your grandmother is hiding more than just money?" one asked. Lucas forced a somber expression. "I believe justice will prevail. The court will uncover the truth." Emma and Eleanor exited moments later. The defense attorney sighed. "We need a break in this case." At that moment, Emma's phone buzzed. A message from her private investigator, Mark Davidson. "Found something. You need to see this." Emma's pulse quickened. This case was far from over. Lucas Grayson sat in his penthouse overlooking Manhattan, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, his jaw clenched tight. The courtroom battle was intensifying, and Emma Caldwell was proving to be more of a problem than he had anticipated. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. A masked number. He hesitated before answering. A low voice sneered through the receiver. "Lucas, your time is running out." Lucas exhaled sharply. "I told you I'll have the money soon." "You told us that last month," the voice growled. "Your debt isn't disappearing just because you dragged your grandmother to court. The people I work for don't like delays." Lucas's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll win this case. When I do, the inheritance is mine. You'll get your money." A slow chuckle echoed on the other end. "You better hope so, Grayson. Because if you don't, court won't be the only place you'll be fighting for your life." The call ended. Lucas hurled his glass against the wall, shattering it. His hands trembled. For months, he had been drowning in debt from failed investments and risky deals. When the banks refused to bail him out, he turned to dangerous men for help. Now they were collecting. And if he didn't deliver soon, he'd lose more than just money. Dragging Eleanor to court had been a desperate move. He never expected her to fight back this hard. Emma Caldwell sat across from Mark Davidson in a quiet cafe. The private investigator leaned in, sliding a file across the table. "I found something," Mark said. "That offshore account? It's not what it seems." Emma flipped through the pages. The money transfers traced back to a facility in Brooklyn, a small, nearly abandoned hospital. Her brows furrowed. "This place, it's still operational?" "Barely," Mark said. "It's been running on anonymous donations. No government funding, no press coverage." But I dug deeper. Guess who their largest donor is? Emma's stomach tightened. "Eleanor Grayson." Mark nodded. "She's been keeping this place alive, providing free care for veterans, people who fell through the cracks. That offshore account? Every penny has gone into keeping those doors open." Emma let out a slow breath. "So she didn't steal the money. She hid it for them." Mark smirked. "You think the court will see it that way?" Emma frowned. "That depends. Can you get me evidence? Something concrete." Mark tapped the file. "I already did. Receipts, doctor statements, patient testimonies. It's all there." Emma exhaled. "This changes everything." Lucas strode into the courthouse the next morning, his usual confidence restored. He spotted Emma outside the courtroom, studying her notes. "Trying to save her, Caldwell," he taunted. Emma didn't even glance at him. Justice isn't about saving or destroying Lucas. It's about the truth. Lucas scoffed. "Truth? My grandmother stole from the trust. This court will see that soon enough." Emma finally looked at him, her gaze piercing. "Will they? Or will they see that you're the one with everything to lose?" For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed Lucas's face. Then it was gone, replaced by a smirk. "We'll see." Inside the courtroom, the judge took his seat. "Prosecution, continue your case." Harper stood. "Your Honor, we will now establish motive. Eleanor Grayson has spent years controlling the family's finances. Her power over the trust allowed her to manipulate assets at will. This was a calculated theft, designed to enrich herself. Emma rose immediately. Objection. Speculation. Sustained, the judge ruled. Harper adjusted his tie. Then let's put it simply. The prosecution calls Lucas Grayson to the stand. Emma's eyes narrowed as Lucas walked confidently toward the witness stand. She knew exactly what he was about to say. He took his oath and sat. Harper wasted no time. Lucas, why did you bring this case to court? Lucas put on a somber expression. Because my grandmother betrayed my trust. My parents left me their share of the family estate, and she claimed she would protect it. Instead, she used it for her own agenda. Emma watched him closely. He was good at this, playing the victim. But she had something he didn't know about. Harper continued, and how did this affect you? Lucas exhaled. I trusted her. I believed she was safeguarding my future. But instead, I discovered she had funneled money away, leaving me with nothing. Emma stood. Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine the witness. The judge nodded. Proceed. Emma stepped forward. Lucas, when did you first suspect your grandmother was misusing funds? Lucas hesitated. Last year. Emma raised an eyebrow. Interesting, because last year, financial records show you took out a series of high-risk investments, ones that failed. And when the banks refused to help, you turned to private lenders, didn't you? Lucas's jaw clenched. That's irrelevant. Emma tilted her head. Is it? Or is it exactly why you need this court to believe your grandmother stole from you? Lucas's hands curled into fists. She stole from the trust. Emma held up a folder. Or maybe she just refused to bail you out. The courtroom fell into silence. Lucas's face darkened. He had underestimated her. Emma turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have new evidence that will prove where that money really went. The judge nodded. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. As the gavel struck, Lucas felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. Emma had just turned the tide. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Emma Caldwell hurried inside, clutching the folder that could change everything. Today's court session would be different. Today, she had proof. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with tension. Lucas Grayson sat stiffly at the prosecution table, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. His attorney, Daniel Harper, whispered something to him, but Lucas barely responded. He was losing control of the case, and he knew it. Eleanor Grayson, seated beside Emma at the defense table, remained calm, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She had been through worse battles in her life. This was just another storm to weather. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, taking his seat. Ms. Caldwell, you requested to introduce new evidence. Emma rose. Yes, Your Honor. I have uncovered documents that prove my client did not steal money from the Grayson Family Trust. Instead, she used those funds to finance a nearly forgotten medical facility, Brooklyn Veterans Hospital. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Lucas stiffened. Emma walked toward the jury, holding up the file. The prosecution claims Eleanor Grayson embezzled $50 million for personal gain. But these documents tell a different story. Every dollar in that offshore account was funneled into a hospital that serves forgotten war veterans, men and women with no insurance, no resources, and nowhere else to turn. She handed copies to the judge. These are financial records showing direct transfers from my client's account to the hospital. Additionally, I have sworn statements from doctors and patients confirming Eleanor Grayson's contributions. The judge reviewed the papers. Mr. Harper, does the prosecution have a response? Harper hesitated before standing. Your Honor, even if this money was used for charity, it does not change the fact that it was taken without authorization. The issue remains she moved family trust funds without legal consent. Emma didn't flinch. Then let's talk about legal consent. She turned to Lucas. Mr. Grayson, As the primary beneficiary of the Grayson Family Trust, you were entitled to certain funds. However, your grandmother was the trustee, the person responsible for approving expenditures. Is that correct? Lucas's jaw clenched. Yes. Emma took a step closer. And trustees are allowed to make financial decisions for the betterment of the trust's legacy, correct? Lucas shifted in his seat. Within reason. Emma held up another document. This is the original mission statement of the Grayson Family Trust, written by your great-grandfather, Charles Grayson. In it, he explicitly states that a portion of the trust's wealth should always be used to serve those in need, especially war veterans, whom he personally fought alongside in World War II. She let the words sink in before continuing. Eleanor Grayson followed that mission. She didn't steal from the trust, she honored its original purpose. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lucas shot up. That money should have gone to the family, not some rundown hospital. Emma turned, her eyes locking onto his. Or maybe you just wanted it to go to you. Lucas's face paled. The judge pounded the gavel. Order in the court. Harper cleared his throat. Your Honor, while this is compelling, the fact remains that Mrs. Grayson acted without consulting the trust's other beneficiaries. That alone constitutes a violation. Emma smiled. Actually, that's not entirely true. There was another beneficiary who supported her decision, Lucas Grayson's father. Lucas froze. That's impossible. My father died years ago. Emma nodded. Yes, but before he passed, he signed an addendum allowing his share of the trust's funds to be used for medical philanthropy. Your grandmother was acting in accordance with his wishes. The courtroom gasped. Lucas looked like he had been punched in the gut. The judge reviewed the new documents. I will need time to assess this evidence. We will reconvene tomorrow. Court is adjourned. As the gavel struck, Lucas stormed out. His world was unraveling. Meanwhile, Eleanor leaned toward Emma, a knowing smile on her lips. I told you, dear. The truth always wins in court. Emma exhaled, her grip tightening on her notes. The battle wasn't over yet. The morning air outside the Manhattan Supreme Court was crisp, but inside, the tension was suffocating. Eleanor Grayson sat at the defense table, hands resting lightly on her lap, her face unreadable. Across from her, Lucas Grayson stared at his own clenched fists. His confidence from earlier days had faded. The judge entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. Ms. Caldwell, you may continue presenting your evidence. Emma Caldwell stood, her movements deliberate, her voice steady. Your Honor, yesterday, we presented evidence proving that the funds in question were used to support Brooklyn Veterans Hospital. Today, we will take that further. She turned toward the jury. The prosecution claims Eleanor Grayson misused family trust funds. But what if I told you she had permission from someone whose voice mattered more than anyone else's? She gestured toward the screen beside the witness stand, where a digital copy of a document appeared. This is an official addendum to the Grayson Family Trust, signed by Charles Grayson Jr., Lucas Grayson's late father. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Lucas stiffened. Emma continued. Mr. Grayson's father, before his passing, allocated a significant portion of his estate to medical philanthropy. He specifically stated that his inheritance should support veterans in need. Eleanor Grayson was not acting against the family's wishes, she was carrying them out. The judge leaned forward, reviewing the document. This signature has been verified? Emma nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Independent experts confirmed its authenticity. The judge looked to the prosecution. Mr. Harper, do you wish to challenge this evidence? Harper hesitated. He exchanged a glance with Lucas before rising. Your Honor, while this document is legitimate, it does not absolve Mrs. Grayson of failing to consult the other beneficiaries. Lucas Grayson, as an heir, had a right to be involved in financial decisions. Emma smiled slightly. He did, and he was Lucas shot her a sharp look. That's a lie. Emma held up another document. Mr. Grayson, did you ever read your father's will in full? Lucas hesitated. I trusted my lawyers to handle it. Emma nodded. That's what I thought. Because if you had read it, you would have known that your father's will named your grandmother as the trustee, with full discretion over the medical philanthropy funds. You were not excluded, you simply never exercised your right to participate. The courtroom fell into silence. Lucas's expression darkened. That money should have been mine to manage. Emma took a step closer. Or you wanted it to cover your debts? Lucas's jaw clenched. Objection. Harper snapped. Speculation. The judge raised a hand. Sustained. But I would like to hear more about this claim. Emma nodded. Gladly, Your Honor. I have obtained financial records showing that Lucas Grayson took out several high-risk loans over the past 3 years. When those investments failed, he turned to private lenders. And when those lenders came calling for repayment, he needed a large sum fast. Lucas stood abruptly. That has nothing to do with this court case. Emma turned to him. Doesn't it? You accused your grandmother of theft because you needed that money. But the truth is, the only person trying to manipulate the family trust for personal gain was you. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Lucas's face burned with anger. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. Lucas, I would have helped you if you had just asked. But instead, you dragged me to court, tried to destroy my name, all because of your own mistakes. Lucas's shoulders sank. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. The judge exhaled. We will recess until tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. As the gavel struck, Emma turned to Eleanor. I think we just won this case. Eleanor smiled. Not yet. But we're close. Lucas stormed out of the courtroom. But for the first time, he wasn't sure where he was running to. The halls of the Manhattan Supreme Court echoed with hurried footsteps and hushed whispers as another day of trial began. The media frenzy outside had grown more chaotic, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions at anyone remotely involved in the case. Inside, the tension was heavier than ever. Eleanor Grayson sat at the defense table, composed as always, while Emma Caldwell flipped through her notes, waiting for the session to begin. Across from them, Lucas Grayson's hands were clenched into fists. The revelations from the previous day had shaken him, and Emma could see the cracks forming in his once unshakable confidence. The judge entered, and the bailiff called for order. The court is now in session. Emma stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Margaret Langley to the stand. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and an elderly woman stepped inside. Dressed in a modest gray dress, her hands trembled slightly as she approached the witness stand. Please state your name and occupation for the court, Emma said gently. Margaret cleared her throat. My name is Margaret Langley. I have worked as a housekeeper for the Grayson family for over 30 years. Emma nodded. Ms. Langley, do you recall the night Eleanor Grayson was first accused of embezzlement? Margaret swallowed hard. Yes, I do. Emma took a step closer. Did anything unusual happen that night? Margaret hesitated. Her gaze flickered toward Lucas, who stared back at her, his expression unreadable. She let out a slow breath. Yes. Mr. Lucas came to me and asked me to do something wrong. A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Lucas's face paled. Emma pressed on. What did he ask you to do? Margaret's voice trembled. He told me to forge financial documents, to make it look like Mrs. Grayson had stolen the money. He said it was just a precaution, that he needed leverage in case she refused to hand over the trust funds. Gasps filled the room. Emma turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have copies of the original financial statements and the falsified ones. Forensic analysis confirms that the forged documents were created using Mr. Grayson's personal computer. Lucas jumped to his feet. She's lying. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Emma faced Lucas directly. Is she? Or are you just panicking because your plan is falling apart? Lucas's breathing was sharp and uneven. His lawyer, Daniel Harper, whispered something to him, but Lucas wasn't listening. The judge looked at Margaret. Ms. Langley, are you saying that Mr. Lucas Grayson fabricated evidence against his grandmother? Margaret nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And I have proof. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. I recorded our conversation that night. I didn't want to do what he asked, but I was afraid of losing my job. Emma took the flash drive and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, we request this be played in court. The judge nodded. Proceed. A moment later, Lucas's voice filled the courtroom. Margaret, it's simple. Just alter the dates on the documents. If she fights me on this, I'll use it to push her out. The money belongs to me, not her. Lucas shut up. That's taken out of context. Emma folded her arms. Is it? Because it sounds a lot like fraud to me. The judge's expression was grim. I will need time to review this new evidence. We will reconvene tomorrow. Court is adjourned. As the gavel struck, Lucas stormed out, rage written all over his face. Eleanor turned to Emma. That was a bold move. Emma smirked. He's unraveling Eleanor. And by tomorrow, he'll have nowhere left to hide. The tension inside the Manhattan Supreme Court was palpable. The previous day's bombshell, the recorded confession of Lucas Grayson, had shattered the prosecution's case. Now, all eyes were on what would come next. Eleanor Grayson sat at the defense table, her expression calm yet unreadable. Across from her, Lucas's once steady confidence had been replaced by agitation. He fidgeted in his seat, jaw clenched. Emma Caldwell watched him carefully. He was on the verge of breaking. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge adjusted his glasses before speaking. After reviewing the recording presented yesterday, it is clear that Mr. Lucas Grayson attempted to fabricate evidence against the defendant. This raises serious concerns about the integrity of the accusations made in this court. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the unfolding drama. Lucas's attorney, Daniel Harper, stood quickly. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the issues raised, we maintain that the original concern, the unauthorized use of trust funds, remains valid. Emma rose. Then allow me to introduce one final piece of evidence that will put all doubts to rest. She pulled out a sealed envelope and held it up. This is a letter written by Charles Grayson Jr., Lucas's father, before his passing. It was never made public, but it directly addresses the allocation of the Grayson family trust funds. Lucas flinched. What? That's not possible. Emma ignored him and handed the letter to the bailiff. Your Honor, the defense requests this letter be read into court record. The judge nodded. Proceed. The bailiff cleared his throat and began reading. To whomever it may concern, if you are reading this, it means my time has come. Before I go, I need to make something clear. I have always believed that wealth is not just a privilege, but a responsibility. That is why I have entrusted my mother, Eleanor Grayson, with full control over my portion of the Grayson Family Trust. I know some may question this decision, especially my son, Lucas. If he ever challenges it, remind him of what I have always told him. Legacy is not about what you keep, but about what you give. Mother, use this money for the people who need it most. I trust you. With love, Charles Grayson Jr. The courtroom was silent. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if hearing her son's voice again after all these years. Lucas's face drained of color. No, that letter, it's fake. Emma's voice was steady. It's been authenticated by forensic experts. Your father left no doubt about his wishes. The judge sighed, setting the letter down. Mr. Grayson, It appears your accusations were not only built on false evidence, but also went directly against your father's stated intentions. Lucas slammed a fist against the table. That money was mine. Eleanor turned to him, her voice soft but firm. No, Lucas. It was never yours. It was a gift. And gifts come with responsibility. The judge exhaled. This court needs no further deliberation on the matter. We will move forward with a final ruling tomorrow. As the gavel struck, Lucas sat frozen in place. He had lost. Emma gathered her files and turned to Eleanor. It's over. Eleanor gave a small smile. Almost. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed for statements. But Lucas walked past them, silent, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. Tomorrow, the court would give its verdict. But deep down, Lucas already knew what it would be. The morning sun had barely risen over the Manhattan Supreme Court, but the steps outside were already crowded with reporters, their cameras poised for the moment Lucas Grayson arrived. The previous day's revelation, the letter from his father, had shaken the entire case. Now, everyone was waiting to see how Lucas would respond. Inside the courtroom, Eleanor Grayson sat at the defense table, hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. Emma Caldwell leaned in. Today's the day, Eleanor. We push him into a corner. If he makes one wrong move, it's over. Eleanor's lips curled slightly. I trust you, Emma. Across the room, Lucas sat hunched forward, his fingers drumming anxiously against the table. His attorney, Daniel Harper, spoke in hushed tones, but Lucas wasn't listening. He was too busy thinking about the press outside. He needed to regain control of the narrative before the court handed down its ruling. The judge entered, and the bailiff called for order. The court is now in session. The judge looked over the room. We will hear final statements today. Ms. Caldwell, you may begin. Emma stood. Your Honor, the defense has provided overwhelming evidence that Eleanor Grayson did not commit fraud. We have proven that the funds in question were used in accordance with the original intentions of Charles Grayson Jr. and that Lucas Grayson knowingly falsified documents to mislead this court. Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Emma continued. This is not just a case of money. It is a case of trust. Eleanor Grayson upheld the legacy of the Grayson family. Lucas Grayson, on the other hand, tried to manipulate this court for his own financial gain. She turned toward the jury. The truth is now in your hands. The judge nodded. Mr. Harper, your closing statement? Harper rose, buttoning his suit. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the evidence presented, we maintain that Eleanor Grayson acted without transparency. The court must consider whether financial decisions, no matter how noble, should be made without full consultation of all beneficiaries. Emma smirked. It was a weak argument and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The judge sighed. We will reconvene tomorrow for the final ruling. Court is adjourned. As the gavel struck, Lucas bolted from his seat. He needed to take control. He needed to get ahead of the media. Lucas stepped onto the courthouse steps, immediately bombarded by flashing lights and microphones. He raised a hand, signaling for silence. I have a statement to make. Emma and Eleanor emerged moments later, stopping at a distance. Emma folded her arms. Wait for it, she murmured. Lucas cleared his throat. The accusations against me have been exaggerated. My only concern has been the rightful management of my family's wealth. I believe in the integrity of this court, and I trust that justice will be served. A reporter shouted, What about the letter from your father? Are you denying its authenticity? Lucas hesitated. I believe the court should carefully consider all aspects before reaching a verdict. Emma's phone buzzed. She checked the screen. Mark Davidson had just sent her a message. He took the bait. He's going off script. Your turn. Emma stepped forward, her voice cutting through the crowd. Lucas, if you truly believed in justice, why did you fabricate evidence against your grandmother? The reporters turned sharply, cameras now focused on Lucas. His face reddened. That's not true. Emma held up a small recorder. I think the court would disagree. We all heard the recording of you instructing your housekeeper to forge documents. Would you like to clarify that statement now? Lucas's mouth opened, then shut. He glanced at Harper, who looked away. The reporters swarmed closer. Mr. Grayson, did you lie to the court? Mr. Grayson, do you still believe your grandmother is guilty? Lucas's hands balled into fists. This press conference is over. He turned and shoved his way through the crowd, disappearing into a waiting car. Eleanor let out a soft chuckle. Well played, Emma. Emma exhaled. Tomorrow, the court will make its final ruling, but I think we already know the answer. And as the cameras continued flashing, the world watched Lucas Grayson crumble. The atmosphere inside the Manhattan Supreme Court was electric. The press, the spectators, and even the legal teams could feel the weight of the moment. Today, after weeks of accusations, revelations, and betrayals, the court would deliver its final verdict. Eleanor Grayson sat at the defense table, as poised as ever. Emma Caldwell adjusted her notes, though she hardly needed them now. The evidence had spoken for itself. Across the aisle, Lucas Grayson sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His attorney, Daniel Harper, whispered something, but Lucas didn't respond. He knew what was coming. The judge entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The murmur in the room died instantly. The judge's eyes scanned the room before settling on Lucas. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in the case of Grayson versus Grayson. What began as an allegation of financial misconduct has, in fact, revealed a deliberate attempt to manipulate the legal system for personal gain. Lucas's grip tightened. The judge continued. Mrs. Eleanor Grayson was accused of embezzling $50 million from the Grayson Family Trust. However, this court finds that she acted within the parameters established by Charles Grayson, Jr., who explicitly authorized the use of these funds for philanthropy. The money was not stolen. It was used to support the Brooklyn Veterans Hospital, a cause directly aligned with the trust's original purpose. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. The press hurried to document every word. Emma kept her expression neutral, but beneath the surface, she felt a surge of satisfaction. The case had unraveled exactly as she had planned. The judge shifted his gaze to Lucas. Furthermore, it has been proven that Lucas Grayson engaged in fraudulent activity by fabricating financial documents and misleading this court. Such actions not only undermine the credibility of this case, but also constitute legal misconduct. Lucas's face turned pale. The judge's tone was firm. With that in mind, this court rules in favor of the defendant, Eleanor Grayson. All charges against her are dismissed. Gasps filled the courtroom, followed by the eruption of reporters scrambling to capture the moment. The judge raised a hand for silence. However, he continued, given the evidence of Mr. Lucas Grayson's attempt to defraud this court, we will be referring this matter to the district attorney's office for further investigation. Lucas shot up. No, you can't do that. The judge banged the gavel. Order in the court. Harper yanked Lucas back down into his seat, whispering urgently. But Lucas wasn't listening. His face was twisted with rage and disbelief. Emma exhaled, turning to Eleanor. It's over. Eleanor gave a small, knowing smile. Yes, dear, it is. The judge struck the gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. As the room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, lawyers gathering their files, Lucas stormed toward Eleanor. You did this, he hissed. Eleanor met his gaze, unfazed. No, Lucas. You did this to yourself. Emma stepped between them. I'd suggest you worry less about your grandmother and more about your next day in court, because this isn't over for you. Lucas glared at her before turning and storming out of the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed, microphones flashing in every direction. Mrs. Grayson, how do you feel about your victory? Eleanor paused, then spoke softly. The court has spoken. Justice was served. That is all that matters. Emma guided Eleanor past the cameras. As they stepped into the car, waiting for them, Emma turned to her. What happens now? Eleanor smiled. Now, we go home. And as the city moved on around them, Eleanor Grayson left the courthouse, not as a criminal, but as a woman who had protected her family's legacy no matter the cost. The storm had passed. Eleanor Grayson stood at the massive window of her estate, looking out over the sprawling gardens that had been in her family for generations. The verdict was final. The court had spoken. She was free. Behind her, Emma Caldwell set down a stack of documents on the polished mahogany desk. The press is still buzzing. Your name is everywhere, but this time they're calling you a hero. Eleanor chuckled softly. Funny, isn't it? One moment you're a villain. The next you're a saint. The truth was always the same. Emma took a seat across from her. Lucas is in trouble. The district attorney's office will be investigating his attempt to manipulate the court. He could be facing real legal consequences. Eleanor sighed, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. He is my grandson. No matter what he's done, I cannot simply stop caring. Emma studied her carefully. What are you thinking? Eleanor turned, her gaze sharp yet thoughtful. He still has a choice. He can continue down this path, or he can learn from it. But I won't be the one to decide for him. Lucas Grayson stepped out of the courthouse, avoiding the cameras that still followed him like vultures. His legal troubles were just beginning, but his fight was over. He had lost. A sleek black car pulled up beside him. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Eleanor, calm and composed as ever. Get in, she said simply. Lucas hesitated, but then, with a heavy sigh, climbed into the passenger seat. The driver pulled away from the courthouse, leaving the chaos behind. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then Eleanor spoke. Do you even understand what you did, Lucas? He scoffed. I tried to get what was mine. She turned to him, her eyes sharp. What was yours? The money? The trust? You were willing to destroy me for something that was never just yours to take. Lucas clenched his jaw. I needed it. Eleanor exhaled. And I would have helped you if you had just come to me instead of dragging me through the court, lying, forging documents. Lucas looked away. I didn't think you'd say yes. Eleanor studied him. That's because you never asked. The car turned onto a quiet street in Brooklyn. Lucas frowned. Where are we going? You'll see, Eleanor said. A few minutes later, the car pulled up in front of Brooklyn Veterans Hospital, the place that had been at the center of everything. Eleanor stepped out, waiting for Lucas to follow. Reluctantly, he did. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen. Nurses walked briskly through the halls, tending to patients, many of them elderly veterans, their bodies frail but their eyes full of life. A doctor approached. Mrs. Grayson, it's good to see you. Eleanor smiled warmly. Dr. Patel, this is my grandson, Lucas. Dr. Patel extended a hand. Lucas shook it hesitantly. So, this is where all the money went, Lucas muttered, looking around. Eleanor gestured to the rows of beds, the rehabilitation centers, the veterans in physical therapy. Yes, this is where your father wanted it to go. This is what we built. Lucas swallowed hard. He had spent so much time trying to tear Eleanor down that he had never truly considered why she had done what she did. Eleanor turned to him. You have a choice, Lucas. You can fight the court cases, run from everything, and lose everything. Or you can stay here, work, learn, and actually do something worthwhile. Lucas frowned. You want me to work? Here? Eleanor nodded. Yes. 5 years. No shortcuts. No trust fund. Just work. It's the only way you'll understand what real value is. Lucas looked around again, watching as a young veteran struggled to take a step with his prosthetic leg. A nurse encouraged him, her voice soft but firm. Lucas exhaled. And if I say no? Eleanor met his gaze. Then you will lose the last person in this world who still believes in you. For the first time in weeks, Lucas didn't have an answer. Emma Caldwell walked briskly down the hall of the courthouse, her heels clicking against the polished floor. As she rounded a corner, she nearly collided with someone. Lucas Grayson. She blinked in surprise. He looked different. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something calmer. Emma, he greeted, his voice measured. Lucas, she replied cautiously. What are you doing here? He smirked. No legal trouble if that's what you're asking. Just picking up some documents for the hospital. Emma raised an eyebrow. So, you actually stayed? Lucas exhaled. Yeah, I did. She studied him. And? He hesitated, then shrugged. Turns out, helping people isn't the worst thing in the world. Emma gave a small smile. Good to know. Lucas nodded, then turned to leave. But before he did, he glanced back at her. For what it's worth, you won fair and square. Emma smirked. I always do. As Lucas disappeared down the hallway, Emma couldn't help but feel a rare sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served in court, but redemption? That was something Lucas had to earn on his own. Eleanor sat on her balcony, watching the sunset, a cup of tea in her hands. She heard footsteps behind her. Lucas. He sat down beside her, silent for a moment. Then he spoke. I get it now. Eleanor smiled. Good. Lucas leaned back, exhaling. Do you think the court of life gives second chances? Eleanor chuckled softly. It does, if you're willing to take them. And, for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt like he finally had. And so, justice was served, but redemption? That had to be earned. Eleanor Grayson walked away from the courtroom not just as a free woman, but as a guardian of her family's true legacy. Lucas, once lost in greed, had found a new path not through wealth, but through purpose. Life, like the court, has its own way of revealing the truth. Sometimes, the verdict isn't just about guilt or innocence, it's about the choices we make after the trial is over. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories filled with twists, drama, and suspense. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update.